rapidly increasing in importance. With some 15 billion euro in exposure, we have the largest digitalization portfolio among the international financial institutions. As I said at the beginning, the IB actively contributes to the global infrastructure agenda. We participate in the work of the G20 Infrastructure Working Group and the MDB's Infrastructure Cooperation Platform, the ICP, the MDB's coordinated voices at the Infrastructure Working Group. We have had the pleasure of chairing the EISP for almost 2 years and to work together with the other MDBs on this important topic of the international agenda. And last but not least, I was highlighted in the introduction of this session, the EIB chairs through our president the G20 Long-Term Investors Club, since we all understand how relevant is the involvement of the major stakeholders within the infrastructure arena. All this taken together shows how important infrastructure investment is for us. But you can also see the interlinkages with the climate challenge and broader sustainability consideration. The role infrastructure in achieving the 2030 agenda and the Paris alignment could not be more than crucial. After all, much of the infrastructure that will be used in 50 years is just about to be built now, so it is crucial to do this in a sustainable way. At the same time, we are seeing many challenges. The infrastructure gap is widening. Many countries face limited fiscal space in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic and the global fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine. Then there are the well-known constraints that have proven hard to remedy, be it enabling frameworks or the limited pipeline of bankable projects for private sector investors, the availability of infrastructure data, or the comparability of ESG data. These challenges call for concerted and well-coordinated action, capitalizing on the MDB's wealth of experience, among others. If we want to make this happen, we must bring together not only colleagues at policy level, but also the hands-on experts, the mechanics, if you wish, that know the nuts and bolts of the infrastructure project business in all its dimensions. The recent activities by the G20 and its strong focus on sustainable infrastructure themes are much welcome in this respect. The compendium of quality infrastructure investment indicators put together by IFC and endorsed by the G20 finance ministers in July is a truly valuable document. Its value lies not so much in listing these or other indicators, but in showing that there are ample indicators available that help us assess whether or not a project constitutes sustainable infrastructure. Let us again recall that what IFC had done was a very significant undertaking, but it was not an exercise of reinventing the wheel, for which indeed there is no need. IFC took on the task of compiling and categorizing indicators that are already widely used today across the globe. As a result, while specific country circumstances, of course, always need to be factored in, we can say that we have a good idea of what sustainable infrastructure is. What we need to focus on next, and without delay, is the question of how we make sustainable infrastructure projects happen on the ground and at scale. I'm afraid there is no silver bullet answering the question of how. Rather, this leads us back to topics that we have heard about for years, at times to the point of saturation. However, we cannot afford to lose focus. This certainly holds true for project preparation and private sector mobilization. Private sector participation in infrastructure is indispensable if we want to close infrastructure investment gap. At the same time, it is a challenging and long-term objective. It requires visibility of the investment pipeline, thorough project preparation, and clarity on business models. There are a range of ways of involving the private sector, from outsourcing through full concession structures. These need to be deployed appropriately. In particular, the project preparation phase poses a challenge that we need to focus on. While there is no shortage of project ideas, and quite often no shortage of financial available for well-structured bankable projects, a gap lies in between. Project preparation needs specialized expertise as well as financing support to be able to get the project off the ground. We need to step up our efforts to crowd in private investors. In support of that, the EIB has fostered knowledge sharing among public sector actors through the European PPP Expertise Center. We have also joined forces with the European Commission to blend public and private sector financing and develop risk-sharing tools, notably financial instruments to de-risk projects. The use of blended finance as a means to crowd in the private sector has also been highlighted in the G20 Development and Sustainable Finance Working Groups under the Indonesian presidency. With all that said about the importance of the private sector, we cannot let governments off the hook. The private sector is typically not shy of detecting and grabbing a business opportunity once it surfaces. However, for this to happen, the conditions must be right. For infrastructure, this includes more than anywhere else the need for consistent political support. Such support manifests itself, for example, in a stable and predictable investment climate, adequate regulatory frameworks, and efficient and independent mechanisms for resolving investment disputes. In addition, to make public-private cooperation a success, capacity building is a key element. On that matter, we often see a false dichotomy between public sector service delivery and delivery via PPP structures. As we all know, PPPs can be complex endeavors with many pitfalls, with ideology coming into play at times too. And there aren't many sectors where customers are able and willing to pay for the services provided via a PPP. Sometimes it makes more sense to start with simpler outsourcing of service contracts and to then gradually move to more complex structures over time. The capacity challenge is even more prevalent when we talk about the subnational and regional government levels. The Indonesian G20 presidency has rightly put a spotlight on this topic. The subnational level is key when it comes to provision of core infrastructure. After all, subnational governments are responsible for around 60% of public investment in G20 and OECD countries. Under the Italian G20 presidency last year, the EIB provided extensive support to G20 work on supporting local authorities by bringing the EIB understanding of market needs and gaps in municipality investment to the table. The results of the EIB survey of municipalities served as a base for dialogue among experts. They confirmed the existence of gaps, the impact of the COVID pandemic, and the potential for improvement in administrative capacity. Please rest assured that the EIB is fully committed to providing our support for the sustainable infrastructure agenda. We will work hand in hand with other MDBs, the G20, and our public and private sector clients across the globe, both in terms of financing and expertise. I have finished here my consideration, but please let me thank again the organizers of this meeting, and in particular the Indonesian presidency of the G20 this year. We were very proud to represent the MDBs at the table of the G20 finance ministers, and we look forward to further collaborate with the Indian presidency next year. And we are very eager to participate and to contribute within this very relevant agenda where multilateral cooperation is indeed very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will be continuing the discussion this morning. If you have just 2 more minutes, I know you need to be very soon. I just ask the colleagues if there is any question regarding your intervention. Oh, I don't think so. Otherwise, I would like to also underline that this format of connecting T20 with the G20 and the B20 and the T20, right? We should find a way to continue and build upon the advances that we have made in crossing the lines between different spheres of expertise and governance in the context of the G20 in India. And yesterday, in his opening remarks, President Profumo also floated or suggested the idea of consolidating those results one way or another and show display the possible support of Combina and having Torino as a regular meeting place regarding those issues. So it was very important also that you could come today with us. So, Gelsomina, thank you very much. And we will further communicate the outcomes and results to you and to your team.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to further continue working with you.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. So, dear colleagues, I think today we had this. We had planned to organize the last section of the discussion in the closed door format. Also, the room is organized by if there were panels and an audience. There is no audience. It is not live streamed, our discussion. In principle, we should wrap up our discussion at noon with Francesco Profumo and with Nela online. So I was thinking that we have insights from Raffaele, from Sachin, from Wati, and from Thorsten. We can probably have a substantial round of exchange around with insights. Then we can take a little bit of time for a coffee break, and then we continue when Francesco Profumo is here, and with Nena to formally wrap up the discussion. In fact, we had the panel discussions yesterday, right? So today was not so much having another panel without an audience, but you are all specialists of the topic, involved into the discussions institutionally and for the T20 in the past years. So it was more to have a round of brainstorming across these issues. The title formally of our brainstorm is the following. Let me remind it: infrastructure investment strategies to achieve net zero targets. It was the first points, lessons from the G20 Indonesia, and elements to carry out on the way to the G20 India, right? And you could also include in that approach some reflections on infrastructure finance and governance in the G20, G7, and to Irawati. Yesterday we had this roundtable also about the role of the private sector in the PPPs. I know these are topics we have been involved for many years, also in Indonesia, but really, this is not so much of a formal discussion, but a brainstorm also about what we heard yesterday. And I would like maybe to include one more topic that we can touch upon. There is What could be the program or the way to proceed if we were to consolidate the proposal of this infrastructure observatory, or whether to consolidate the results of this interesting approach of having this seminars. So this is what I suggest. If there is any other point you would like to bring in, let's do that during the discussion. If there is no other remark or comment, I suggest that we start our initial tour de table. And who would like to start? Maybe Irawati, it would be best to start with you. So in case you've got other engagements or, sometimes the remote communication, if you need to leave the floor, maybe we should start with you, right? And then we will continue. How does it sound? You are on mute, Irawati.
Yes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thank you for having me here. So I'm so sorry that I cannot join in physics in Turin, although I really want to. And for Nicola and Professor Fomo, again, thanks for having me here. Actually, I have a small presentation. Maybe if somebody can just show the presentation.
Yes, just a moment.
Yeah, so my point of discussion this morning, it's afternoon now here in Indonesia, in Jakarta. I'm going to discuss about the pathway to financing digital and low carbon transition in the PPP perspectives. Okay. And this is in line with Indonesian government mission to have a net zero emission in 2060. So I'm going to discuss here what is the PPP in Indonesia context, because I'm a lawyer, a specialist in infrastructure, and I assist the government and private sector to transact the PPP projects. Next. Okay, so in Indonesia, PPP has already introduced around 15 years ago, whereby the government introduced a new sector infrastructure regulations and also cross-sector regulations to enable PPP projects in Indonesia. And Indonesian government already identified the need for infrastructure development funds, which are around 45.8 billion will be funded by state and regional budget. And then from the needs of 385 billion, which is identified by the government during 5 years period, 76.4 billion will be funded by SOE, state-owned enterprise, and regional-owned enterprise. And the government identified that private sector will then support not less than 261.7 billion to fund the infrastructure provision and infrastructure development in Indonesia, either through PPP and through other means. Next. Okay, so this is the regulatory framework of PPP Indonesia. We have main regulation, which is across sectors. We also have sectoral regulations, because under Indonesian regime, the infrastructure sectors ruled under different acts and different laws. And then we have cross-sector, like online acquisition, planning and permitting, construction, state and regional asset, environmental, financing, and manpower. And during the course of 15 years, the government already prepared regulative framework plus institutional framework, whereby, for instance, the government established PTSMI, Sarana Multi Infrastructure, which is the state-owned enterprise under Ministry of Finance to fund infrastructure projects. And also, the government already established IIGF, the Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund. So those two companies are aimed to be the ecosystem within Indonesian PPP. And then also the government already allow VGF, government support, in order to ensure that non-financially feasible projects can be feasible through support of viability gap funding from the government. And then the government also allow the availability payment, we call it AP, from either central government or local government. So with those regulatory framework and institutional arrangement, a couple of PPP projects already transacted. And my team also has assisted the government to transact it. For instance, the Palaparings project, the fiber optics throughout Indonesia from west to east, the west part of Indonesia, central part of Indonesia, and east part of Indonesia. So it was the very first PPP project within the MOT. And we also assisted the very first PP project within MOT on the railway. And also Indonesian government introduced unsolicited projects, and we assist the first unsolicited project in toll roads. And just lately we assisted transaction of unsolicited projects of airport owned by Gudang Garam Indonesia. Next. These are the infrastructure that allowed to be PPP by the government. So there are lots of projects like transportations. We have here railway, airports, ports, and toll roads. And toll roads is the most major PPP transactions. So they already have PPP transaction faster than other sectors. We have urban here, which cover water supply, wastewater, waste to energy, terminals, drinking water. And we are now entering into the stage of social infrastructure PPP, which will cover hospitals, schools, sports, and arts. And we have here, of course, in line with the government vision to have net zero emission in 2060, we allow PPP transaction on renewable energy and green infrastructure. And also the government now propose and support development of EV and automation infrastructure, and of course, digital infrastructure. And in addition to that, there are also other sectors like tourism, gas pipelines, public housing, telecommunication, etc. Next. This is the stages of PPP project in Indonesia. Normally, we divide it into the phase of planning by the government, or we call it the government contracting agency. And then after that, it will go through preparation phase. Normally, the government, central government will assist either local governments or ministerial to do the preparation phase. And lots of consultants, international consultants in the field of legal, financial, and technical will assist the government in order to ensure that the project prepared by the government, central government, and local government is financially feasible and give the terms that suitable to national and international investors. And then after preparation phase, the government will do the transaction phase, which cover like market consultations, project site confirmations, issuance of PQ and RFP, request for proposal, and then bid award process, signing of PPP agreements, and then financial close, which normally will be conducted within 6 to 12 months. And then the next phase for, in Indonesian PPP phase will be implementation phase. Next. Now, this is the typical PPP project structure. So I mentioned before about IIGF and SMI. IGF is Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund, also under MOF, state-owned enterprise under MOF, which function to provide government guarantee. And there is also SMI. Both IIGF and SMI they have additional assignment from the government, which are to assist GCA, Government Contracting Agency, to prepare the PPP projects. So as I said that ministerial or central government institutions or local governments, when they have projects, normally they need, normally they do not have enough capability to do the project preparations. And project preparation in Indonesia is still expensive, whereby they have to assign financial, technical, and legal consultants. So the government, in this case, normally the MOF will assign IIGF or SMI to assist the GCA doing the project preparations. And then there will be tender conducted by the government, because on PPP projects, we do not allow to do direct appointment. So normally there will be a tender process, and then whoever private sectors or consortium who win the bid, they will normally establish an IBE, an SPV, which is Indonesian company owned by the bidding, the consortium, the bidding winner. And then of course, as part of the ecosystem, there will be banks and financial institutions. Now Indonesia has sovereign wealth fund, the first sovereign wealth fund, INA, and they now added on the ecosystem. Next. Okay, I believe that during Pak Danang Parikesit session, he mentioned about G20 activities and recommendations, because I'm also as the thematic coordinator at Task Force 8 Infrastructure Financing. And my mission is to ensure that one of the most important recommendation from G20, especially at Task Force 8 Infrastructure Financing, among other recommendations, is to accelerating the progress towards net zero emission by recognizing added value of a multi-level approach to environment, social, and governance, in particular to mainstream sustainable infrastructure investment across multiple financial models. And also, it is important for me to pass this message, the second message, because there is a strong recommendation from Task Force 8020 for the establishment of a global investment platform for sustainable urban infrastructure to be implemented in the round of G20 presidencies in Indonesia. And we hope that it will be continued during the next presidency, which are India, Brazil, and followed by South Africa. So as I mentioned, that one of the important ecosystem in Indonesian PPP, and I trust also in other region PPP, is the financing. Currently in Indonesia, PPP projects supported by local banks. Our state banks now support a lot PPP projects. So I mentioned before about the very first unsolicited PPP projects on toll roads. So there is one toll roads just reached the financial close it is supported by 30 banks, and still lots of PPP projects ongoing under preparation, and there are still a lot coming. Not mention the renewable energy and our new capital city. So definitely we need huge financing support. So that's why I think the recommendation on the global investment platform within G20 context will be relevant. And during this Indonesia presidency, it can be considered as kick-off of the recommendation, and T20 Indonesia team is planning to have a post summit session whereby we will deliver our recommendation to the next T20 in India, with the hope that we can rolling this proposal and recommendation on the global investment platform, and of course support from D20 long-term investment group will be much needed. So that is my presentations. Thank you for your kind attention.
It's very, very clear. I think very nice. It looks very simple, right? It might be a bit different. I just have one question as for me is how much the G20 presidency or the G20 momentum, you know, with the acceleration of meetings and convenings and so on, has been useful or neutral as per the reinforcing the case for the GPP approach that you are describing. Has there been any impact of G20 discussions on strengthening this framework or gathering more entities around this approach and this vision?
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I cannot hear very clearly, but I try to catch the question. So, within the Indonesian G20 presidency, we have what's so-called, of course, our team is T20 think tank. And within think tank, we have infrastructure finance task force, right? And there is also B20, Business 20, under the Indonesian Chambers of Commerce. They have also infrastructure and energy task force. And I learned that one of the strong recommendations from them is the blended financing. It is under the B20 infrastructure task force. And then we have under the G20 itself, the infrastructure working group. So I attended a couple of meetings by the G20 working groups during the dialogue among the T20, B20, and G20. And on the PPP, infrastructure working group is still discussing on the project preparation, how the government use this presidency in order to gather all the countries to support how to do the faster project preparation and easier project preparation in order to deliver more infrastructure projects. And also I learned that G20 on the infrastructure working group also acknowledged the blended finance as something that need to be pushed during the G20 members, whereby under this blending finance, there is a discussion on blending among the government fund, MDB fund, and infrastructure, and also philanthropies. For sure that the Indonesia G20 presidency, they're also quite active on discussion on infrastructure, and I'm quite sure that it can give impact to PPP development in Indonesia and other regions within the G20 in a way that for those countries who already developed, so they can give support on, for instance, financing, technical assistance, and also for less developing like us, we can learn a lot. But there are lots of projects ongoing in Indonesia that can also maybe attracted to other countries within the G20.
Okay.
I hope I catch the question very well. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's not really clear.
I'm trying to speak out loud so you can hear me.
Yeah.
But it was very clear. Thank you. Dear colleagues, any question for Irawati or any remark? That's fine. All right. So, thank you, Irawati. Thank you very much. We have your presentation. We will share it as material, right, from the seminar. This is very valuable, and we will keep you also informed about the follow-up of the discussions.
Okay, thank you very much, and have a great day for all of you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I think it was a very good presentation. Actually, who would like to pick up on the and to follow up? Shall we go on with you, Thorsten, and the issue of digitalization of our trajectories?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would like to do that. Yeah.
Maybe more as a conversation.
Yes, sure, absolutely. You can.
What an honor to bring to you. So, well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And of course, we know each other since a while now, and it's also a great honor, pleasure to be in here. And whatever I share is it's a teamwork. So with the OECD, we have been working together during the G20, and from my side, I have been working in Argentina, Tokyo, Saudi, Italy now. And the focus is, so I'm a little bit external to the industry. So the focus has been from my side within the team, working on policy briefs on the digitalization efforts, or digitalization not as an infrastructure, but how digitalization can improve productivity and efficiency of infrastructure projects. And however, we have a great team. So we work with the Technical University of Munich, another university in Germany, then Stockholm University, and we have a great network which came through the work of me and another colleague at the World Economic Forum, which convened basically all the major large infrastructure companies, and over the years discussing those issues in Davos. So and then we utilized that network in order to do some hopefully meaningful policy briefs. And on the technological side, yeah, no, so it's it's can do with or without. We actually started this conversation before, towards the end of Saudi T20, and when Italy took over. Yes, it was after Saudi, right? And we looked at it and said, okay, it has a strong financing aspect, as we had also yesterday, today, which is fine, which is actually nothing to oppose there. But we were missing a little bit the bottom-up engineering challenges of large scale or any infrastructure project, which is overlooked. But when you look at an asset, what matters, of course, is the financial performance over the life cycle. And much more than the construction costs, which are always out of time and budget, right? To deliver most of those projects. Nevertheless, when you look at the problems, it comes down to efficiency and productivity. I think that was yesterday also a very nice conclusion. And the industry is lacking productivity and efficiency over the decades. It has literally no improvement in this industry compared to the industry for all the manufacturing industry, which is really increasing efficiency. So we were looking at that and said, okay, then we have the digitalization trend. Then what can digitalization do to support the increase of efficiencies and productivity in the industry? And so we were started, and then I think it was very well received, the Italy G20. And in the nutshell, and this is not just to say that technology is the solution, not at all. So we're not like a technologists here, technology determinism, that technology is the savior of the industry. Quite the contrary, and we have a very hands-on projects running in Germany, which I can share, where this is an insight which is not the case. Nevertheless, we thought, okay, we have the big data, digitalization efforts, artificial intelligence. I don't want to for also blockchain, this kind of stuff, but there's a lot of great technology out there. And yeah, let's see. Sorry, it was 20 megabytes. And no worries, I will not go through all this, those slides, which we have developed actually over the past now 2-3 years, and try with the power of my voice to share some of the insights and say, so what's the issue? Why are we not sharing data easily? And when we believe that the sharing of data and aggregating of data is a benefit, this is the assumption. The first problem is we have always difficulty to find the business case of use case. That is not just for the infrastructure, this is for any industry. Like the BASF, the large chemical companies, I think they have 5,000 data and AI engineers sitting in Germany, and they were just thinking, okay, what is the use case? You know, and of course they're looking at efficiency and streamlining the processes. And we came up with the idea that okay, if I share data, I don't want to lose the data. And that is the whole concept of federation. And technically speaking, it is possible, and you have heard about this big project on EU level, it's Gaia X. However, we are not, we are ourselves a member of that, the Gaia X initiative, but we don't call it Gaia X in that respect. But the concept is quite appealing, that you build basically a distributed platform where you can easily hook up and start sharing data, and you remain the sovereign over those data. And in addition to this technological solution, the EU is pushing also for a regulatory solution. And this is called the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, which basically the Data Governance Act is already passed. And now there's a couple of months where the member states have time to implement it. This focuses on the public sector, so it's quite relevant for the public sector. The Data Act will be maybe 24. This is more complicated because it's the private sector, and it actually kind of forces to share data, right? So, but in a secure way. So I think because the EU or Europe has a problem, a competitive problem against the United States, with these big hyperscalers, these the large, the Googles, etc. But also against China, which also collects a lot of data, utilizes those data. So the idea is, okay, we are very fragmented. The industry is very fragmented. Last time I used the term fragmented in the again with the Bavarian Infrastructure Association. They didn't like the term. They said, "Oh, we are very diverse," and they saw that as an advantage. And I think you can say siloed, fragmented. The silos are working quite good because someone is making money in those silos, right? But when you look at the bigger problems like decarbonization, you cannot achieve it in the silos. So hence I use the word fragmentation. So you need to you need to open silos. So let's agree we have open silos. keep your slide on, but we'll share later. And I would have played to show this slide for so many, so I'm just getting lost there, but maybe a few to summarize them. So then we say, okay, the digital federation could be a way forward, and then really resonated. And I think we had the G20 take on that. We could publish it in the journal, and we took it forward to the Indonesia G20, and we're highlighting actually, and thanks again for Valeria and also for all the team members to pull it off. So it was a different setting to achieve that. And then we were highlighting the issues of the digitalization. And we, to wrap up already, what I initially said, there are problems of digitalization itself. So these are cultural, regulatory problems. This is the adoption of technology, etc. But it is not a solution in itself. So what we're doing now currently with a project in Germany, we're thinking, okay, if technology was a solution, it will be already there. And there's technology to have a federated approach, where you share data without losing the data. And there's also other way of encrypting data than sharing. But this doesn't seem to be the issue why the digitalization doesn't succeed in the built environment. And so we are now working with the Bavarian Infrastructure Association with access to all these big contractors, etc. We work with universities, and I would say, okay, it's a legal organization for the German context, or for the rich world context, let's say like that. And so we are promoting, and maybe that's maybe also a good thing to discuss. We're promoting to build. What is the future association of the infrastructure association? They usually have their members. What are they doing with this? They do some lobbying, etc., etc. So, but I think the future association must do much more. So we think that the future association becomes kind of a Treuhänder in German. Basically, it's an organization which is from the industry, for the industry, and provides that data federation service. So, as a cooperative, which is it's not a not-for-profit approach, it's a profit approach, but with always with the industry in mind, and to lower the fear that the data get lost or are stored somewhere where they want it, because there's a lot of fear that the data they can't control the data, and so and that resonates quite strongly. So we can't actually use it with an organization in legal proposal. Then we need a federator, which is this kind of from the industry, and then we start with like 15 big let's say contractors. However, the issue is it's not for the contractors. Actually, it is more for the suppliers. So we have a little bit of a rebalancing of interests. There are some who want to start very quickly, like internet companies. They immediately say, "Oh, that's a new sales channel. We can sell our technology." The contractors usually, some of them, they're perfect. They have their digital environment, right? They don't want to share. And once they share, others get very suspicious. They don't want to give it to you. So all from each project, they start building APIs from scratch again. So someone is always spending money. So we want to actually that the members of that federation organization are the many suppliers you have like in Germany or in Europe who has not the means to have their own technology, so they are depending on cloud services anyway, but to rebalance the interest of it. So that quite resonates. It's very practical, and probably when you focus on hardware finance, already the money, the PPP models, hardware finance. So we often, I think you said it yesterday, it's not an issue of there's no money, but there are no projects, right? So where are the bankable sustainable digital projects in the industry? And that's certainly the case in Germany. In the sustainable decarbonization build projects, there are no pipeline. There's no pipeline, or very little small pipeline, because the public administrations, they have no people to manage that. They're completely understaffed. So digital is really replicable projects, templates for those local communities, I think they're quite good. For their technology works, they should work, and in a kind of federated style. So that's my contribution.
I have a question related to the institute itself in this very moment, because it's also more and more difficult sometimes to work across different skills. And your type of institute, right? The was established in China,
yes.
Right? So how is it that you can successfully work with the think tank on the one hand that is originated in China, and still confidently cooperate with the infrastructure development of Bavaria, for instance. Right? Yeah. When you were mentioning that, I was thinking this would be more and more difficult in France, for example. And this is just a tiny sample, of what happens globally. So if it's too much of a time, because we are here together. Forget it, but otherwise, if you could comment on that, that would be also interesting.
That's a leaf of France, it's the land of psychoanalysis. So, the psycho session now, of course, and I think there are other experts on China and a very big neighboring country, which is a pragmatic relationship. And I think from the media most of it, actually one of my core expertise is China on the geopolitical side. And we set up a think tank around 2012. There's some background when I worked with the World Economic Forum, which runs this big summer Davos. It's the only international organization which could do that. Also runs it like in India and other parts of the world. And it's quite unusual because we built up a quite good relationship with the friends and partners. We built it up. It's like about 150 fellows now. It's, I think, one of the leading private think tanks. Private is already about how can it be something in China private? And just to make that answer preempt that question, in China everything which is private is public, and everything which is public is private. Whereas here everything is private, and public. So no, that's actually the line in China between a private think tank is very hard. If you are in public office in China, like a technocrat, it's not a politician at that point, you are not allowed to engage in any of this. Only if you're retired or out of business from the government side. Whereas here in the West, you can be a running politician and you have all these engagements. And actually, to be fair, that's quite hard for the obvious reasons of corruption, of let's say not corruption in receive money, but to mix interests. So that's quite hard. So and yes, the reception is quite difficult. So if you are too pro-China, then you risk your career in that sense. So if you read some of my texts, you will see that I have a fairly balanced approach towards China. And when we work with on the G20, I think it's not an issue, I found, even though the G20 has its groupings. And but when we go more into running a German project, we set up a different so that's the answer.
I've got another question for us all. In the past 4 years, I've been co-chairing the infrastructure task force in the G20 in the past 4 years. I have seen very little input from Chinese organizations in our task force, whereas China obviously has just a little bit of influence, right? Such issues both in China, in Asia, but also globally, and maybe it's China can also elaborate on that. How could we improve these gaps of significant countries or regions, like in the T20s? Because if we want to keep the T20 environment that's 360 degrees, right? And not just have the T20, which is yet another chamber of echo of some approaches. I'm not saying they are less talented, but some approaches about the finance sector typically the insights from G20 navigating, which is very much the EU approach. But how could we diversify? How could we improve that? Could we use the location of the observatory or different ways to work across the different domains, right? The different spheres. That is, I think, a very interesting and delicate question. But if anyone here has some tips or ideas, let's try to put it on the table.
Just I think we had a discussion with Robert yesterday night, exactly this one, and we're wondering how, you know, it's very difficult right now to kind of engage with China on infrastructure team without like having the bad look from like the other people around. But you know, I think the main step forward that we have to do is to bring the Chinese stakeholders into this committee and discuss with them. And we did this effort with the last meeting we had in May with Justin Lin, which I think he provided a very nice and interesting perspective on the future of infrastructure in a very balanced way, which is not should not be taken for granted. But I think really in terms of, you know, the next steps, in terms of the observatory, we really need to bring Chinese stakeholders and make the efforts to bring it to the table and make the discussion more fruitful. Because it's really, if I look at the past events within the G20, haven't seen many of them in the discussion, which is, I mean, they're really, if you look at the infrastructure sector, the investment, the financing, they're all about China. So it really is a very big mistake to not do that in the future.
Looking forward. Actually, I know you had a meeting, or you organized a meeting a few days ago with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Could it be a way also maybe to strengthen, to connect, further connect?
Thank you. Thanks, Nicola. I think thanks for very interesting presentation. But as you know, these are the days when we go by the buzzwords, and the moment those buzzwords are there, people start jumping in and taking their own conclusions. When you talk about infrastructure, immediately the traditional positions which have emerged in the recent past, they come up. Be that in terms of its financing and the relative dimensions. Same is the issue with data. The moment you mention data, people start feeling a bit jittery, and right from Japanese G20 presidency, the unease has accentuated in all different directions. Japanese presidency pressing for digital trade, talking about the data, the Indian position of data localization for the financing and the banking sector, including data mirroring, data for development. You find a number of combinations where data initially related to bank and finance, then expanding to many other spheres that gets on. But the initial rationale that you gave in your presentation, which I think brings in the point, which is far more, I think, a concern, is in terms of the governance that is associated with infrastructure. And this governance, as you rightly said in the beginning, is emanating out of inefficiency, delays, and also productivity. The point where you are landing up may be extremely contentious, but the point from where you started is extremely important, very, very important for G20. And I think irrespective of China and others, everybody would converge, the perspective would converge. Solution, probably data may not be acceptable to all. So how do you think we can still work around the question of good governance within this? Because that's a real challenge we are having for us. The idea also gets further precipitated
as we see the global gateway of the EU, the Global Development Initiative of China, Build Back Better by US, Blue Dots by the US, Japan's quality infrastructure. The list is on and on. How do we bring in convergence? So one perspective will be of the development finance and the associated issues. The other component is the good governance. And I see this fitting in very well as an important pillar part of good governance for infrastructure. And that component we can have. Okay. Here, as Nicola very rightly mentioned, we had the opportunity of working with AIIB very closely. RIS was their knowledge partner when they did their annual board meeting in India, Mumbai. And last week, we hosted the vice president at RIS. And we were talking to him about China's overall positioning and AIIB's connect, which is something which is and here the convergence that we depicted in terms of G20 positioning, that China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, they all as a BRICS have been taking up on several issues, which is a converging position. You leave aside the debt crisis. Otherwise, on several issues, these countries within G20 have agreed on common positions, maybe collectively articulated or even separately articulated. On data, that position is quite converging. So from that perspective, how do you see going forward?
I want to quickly show one slide to see the depth of our working, and I know quickly. I think we are sharing later these slides. This picture, maybe a bit familiar about some of the terminology. This is EU perspective on the regulatory landscape of digital regulations coming up. And it is not complete, but it's near to complete and shows the major regulatory activities. And to make a little bit of an advertisement for myself, I just published a book that's coming out. It's called The Digital Sovereignty Trap. So we have this, you made the localization of data. I think what we faced in the past, the hyper-localization and the golden straitjacket, so that we couldn't have democratic or social values in local political decision making, because countries were kind of trapped into the globalization. What happened in the 2000s and after the crash, etc. And now we have the hyper digitalization. And here, of course, fierce competition over AI, leadership, etc. We say, okay, we don't want to have a hyper digitalization trap that countries cannot act, and we're all depending on some of the hyperscalers. So we have a strong push for sovereignty, which is fair enough, right? Because you don't want to lose out on that opportunity. However, the risk of the sovereignty is that you get into protectionism, and we see that already. And you can see this map is a great map of protecting European values and increasing competition based on.
Where do you start?
Yeah, if you have an interest, let me carry you through. So you see some of the this just shows you see some of the 5G security toolbox. You know, it's targeted towards China. Then, however, it is also targeted towards cybersecurity in 5G. It's not just a China problem that they have Huawei equipment or ZTE equipment. Cybersecurity is really strong. The NIST directive, this is for the cybersecurity protection, right? Then the GDPR is for privacy protection. These are the core regulations. This is already running. The NIST directive running. The Cybersecurity Act is kind of an overall overarching activity. And then you have on the data side, you have the Data Governance Act, the Data Act. This is to share data. Then you have the Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act, which is actually targeted towards the United States, so that towards the hyperscalers, but also to make it more fair. so it has two sides. It is according to the European values and the anxiety us users have in Europe to protect our data, but on the other hand, to protect Europe. So it's a for the non-European, it's a very protective approach. And to answer maybe your question on, so I proposed in my book, I proposed a solution. We had during the G20 Saudi, we were spot on. We were launching a policy briefing which was called the Coordination Committee on the Governance of AI. So I'm not an AI, very afraid or AI will take over. However, there is a challenge with AI. And I think, again, it was not the technological, it was a pure governance thing. And we pitched it to the G20 to set up a coordinating committee on those challenges. It is just a concentration of resources of AI. I mean, there are a few big multinational companies who suck all the R&D, all the talents. So the hurdle is always more. It's not that the AI-driven robot will take over. It's just no. It's not fair for others to actually to go into that business to pick it up. I think for the digitization in relation to infrastructure, I think coordinating committee might be a way to start talking on those issues, because it's critical infrastructure. So there are all kind of things where the digital side is, you can maybe relate as well to critical infrastructure, maybe then people are more interested in talking about that. And or for China, RCEP, and I think India is not part of it, right? Is the new WTO, right? America does not care about it. I mean, I'm exaggerating. It doesn't care about the WTO. China, one would like to care, but it's focusing on the RCEP. That's the new for the WTO. I mean, kind of. They would love to turn it into a, and I think on those big trade agreements, you can also work on it. And the RCEP has a provision on data sharing. It's very light, but I think it's also good to look at those big trade agreements to work. So I think the G20 is still a great forum to have a coordinating committee on those issues. And, yeah, so, but I always teach some of the political digitalization track. They never accept. They never accept because there is no people out there helping. So maybe we have to venture ones and see, because they deal with other stuff there. They only with the anxiety of privacy, which is legitimate, yeah. But we're on the vertical sector digitalization. So
I mean, that is super fascinating, but I think this is not just European Union kind of being afraid of independent or data privacy or whatever. It's a global trend, because if you in other countries, data localization is becoming the rule, right? In India and China, data localization is the main pillar of data regulation, and it's not only about privacy; it's also about being vulnerable in your critical infrastructure, because we have seen during the pandemic that all digital infrastructure in Europe are owned by US, more or less by US corporations, right? So you are dependent on a core function in your society from a foreign provider, and that could be potential issue. So I don't know. I don't know. I think it's very complicated as a discussion.
I think this. I think, in Germany, during the summer break, the military was taking over the COVID response, right? So, and this one, it is General Breuer, and he's building up a hybrid response team in Germany. The German military was just pure defense and in an alliance state. Now it needs to be a defense and hybrid kind of wars, and maybe being deployed somewhere, which is a completely different culture of military. But I had the chance to raise the question about depending on the Hamburg harbor, is that critical infrastructure? And because I was expecting the very military-like response. Yeah, this is to protect them. On the contrary, if we go that path, we can't deal with no one anymore. We go back into our kind of cave and we isolate. It's a matter of mismanagement. it's a matter of risk management. So if you allow me just to because it's kind of, I like this closed door now, and the 5G, the countries who attack most currently, they have no 5G intellectual knowledge about, let's say, Russia. They have no 5G, let's say, industry, indigenous industry, but they currently are one of the biggest attackers. And then just say, oh, because Huawei and China has its virus, this is a risk. It's not more or less a risk. Then you're not supplying that. Actually, you need to ensure that your 5G infrastructure is secure. And the first one has to ensure is the operator, right? The operator can see which data are coming and which data are leaving. And Huawei has no access to that. And it's not to protect Huawei, but it's so highly politicized. The cybersecurity risk is far beyond the issue where you buy your equipment. It doesn't matter where Cisco, they have always backdoors in it, right? The last backdoor was around 2019 or 20. I'm sure there are more backdoors in it. Every partner has backdoors, who knows? But you have to have a proper cybersecurity, and this is what you saw the landscape. This is what they're working on. And I think they're moving really towards risk management, resilience. That was the key terms, hybrid. And to answer hybrid is resilience. This was the military general's answer. So this is I like, and even in the very difficult conversation between the United States and China, EU and China, and with India. Let's exclude Russia for now. That's a completely different situation now. I think you still need to coordinate. You still need to work together. And find new rules. I think that's the only way forward, right? To find new common rules. But there's some who have no interest in those rules.
Super quickly, right? No, because like it's not a trade-off, right? You have like value solutions. For example, Google now is going to operate in Italy 3 data centers, and it's going to provide the technology. But the Italian company team is actually whatever.
Yeah.
Is gonna like manage and all the key for the infrastructure, so it's not about closing yourself. It's about finding a more balanced solution that you can achieve, let's say, sovereignty, as you call it, as well as not falling behind other countries.
So I suggest that we stop here for this segment of the discussion. One very briefly, because we have other aspects of this conversation to deal with. Please.
It basically like the normal it's people projects and yeah. So 40 of them are Pacific Island countries, with the ministry which I went to the Central Asian Republic with small institutions, and I love the question about building better global gateways and networks. So a lot of our clients, they need to what should that is going on? For us, it's more and more of a business of digital technology. What do you ask for? What is the product? So I think this is really important because we have a lot of requests and demands. It's work on this. Where can you do it? This is extremely confused environment. Global gateways are not and Huawei is before. But for your, let's say, an average developing country in Asia Pacific or Pacific Island, where do you go? What's the trusted source? And I remember a few years ago in Avian headquarters, it's the blockchain reservations. It's a solution for everything. And I remember London were presenting this. Hey, it sounds marvelous. But again, put yourself in the position of the person's in the Bishkek. Where do you start? What's the product? Who do you go to? And I think there's an urge need to clarify. Again, what's the safe package? Is it? And as we were talking last night, it's so polarized. And as a result, I think we're keeping back development because people don't know what to ask. And so maybe Oracle, maybe your institute, it's a huge issue.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, thank you, Robert. The other point we had for the insight this morning was keeping it different. And thanks to Thorsten for the frank insights and the impressive level of understanding of the situation. I was thinking whether we could have the same graph as you displayed for the EU, such as for that in the US, about the evolution of the regulation.
I have yeah. I mean, the US is easier because they don't have it. They have it on the state level.
Yeah.
They don't have an overarching cybersecurity law. They don't have an overarching privacy law. It's the California is pressing ahead. Some states are pressing ahead. China is probably on the same level like the EU. They have an AI Act which is implemented, which is okay. Say, oh, but the government can still do all the AI. That's true. Except the government can do. But they are kind of regulating big Chinese tech, how to use AI, etc. So ironically, the EU and China are, you know, in the same speed. You know, and if you just take it from how to regulate business, how to use the digital, they are similar. Of course, China doesn't implement those laws in a different manner. But it might be good to observe that.
One time I said, how do you really silence gathering data in your area and gather somewhere in the system? What is your point of such a this?
You know, the two governance structures. The first governance structure is the IT cyber structure, which actually cloud provider needs to comply to EU law. And quite frankly, Google Cloud, they can do that. And now Google Cloud is setting up its Deutsche Telekom. So it's our Google services completely run by Deutsche Telekom, stored in Germany or in Ireland. So the German users are at EU, maybe. Then there is the governance from the industry along the infrastructure value chain from design, build, operate, infrastructure, the processes. So we were mapping 11 modules, which kind of capture, and I somewhere have a slide which kind of capture the whole value chain of the infrastructure project. And along that, we basically use a use case which cuts across these two governance approaches in a very agile, very easy way. And now we are looking at the logistics use case or procurement. Procurement is you know, a public sector one major infrastructure project in that procurement case. These two use cases we will be looking at. Interestingly, the private construction companies, they're interested in the outline, the procurement phase. So they want to get new business. The logistics case is interesting because we have the supply chain issues, and usually when you part. So you know the German government said I think 300 or 400,000 apartments per year, which they can't deliver. They can't deliver for because there's a skill shortage. There's no people who can build that infrastructure, and then you have the supply chain issues. And when you build those things, there's always a digital interactions. You know, you know, you have to build the APIs that these different stakeholders can work on projects. For major project sites, this works because these are kind of these, you know, lighthouse projects, and there's enough money to put it in. But for the majority of projects, you have that absolute inefficiency. The cybersecurity here is a data sharing, so it's more of a privacy issue, but of personal data. I don't want to share my some just don't want the machine data, or they don't want to, for example, Bauer is a large contractor in Germany. They have their own cloud portal to share an app, but all the others are afraid to share their data because then they have my data. So we want to have a kind of intermediary, a trusted intermediary. This is, and the Data Act and the Data Governance Act on the EU level supports that data mediator. So this is what we want to do.
Okay, great. So we could go on long and long because this is I think we all have the feeling that it's a very, very central issue. But to keep on track our session, I would like to turn to Rafael maybe for a completely other way to look into the issue of infrastructure systems, and especially about green infrastructure and natural capital. So we are leaving the cyberpunk world to get into the world of plants, natural species. But this is also a very important issue, especially in light of the impacts of the pandemic at all levels, including the local level. And this is Nella. Oh, can you say just hello? Hello, Nella.
Hello, Nicholas.
You're welcome to join in. We are, I don't know if you hear me well, we are currently in the final segment of the closed door discussion. You are welcome to stay, of course, and we will get to you about noon. Right? So if you need to do anything, please join at noon. Otherwise, you are welcome to stay, of course.
Okay. So should I leave? So just let me.
You may stay if you would like, but otherwise, please come back at noon.
At noon. Okay. So there's another 20 minutes.
Yes.
Let me know.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.
So, Rafael, yes. No, I think it's more convenient with the mic. And again, Sachin, if you would like to comment at any point, that's fine. Please get into Rafael. I give you the mic.
Thank you, Nicolas. I have some comments, but I'm not sure that the job to with some structure. Because today I'm supposed to speak about the green infrastructure and natural capital. So what I'm using is a project to be involved over the last 3 years from the ESG, looking at the implementation in Italy. And across OECD countries, this concept. But at the same time, I also have some insights from my recent experience with the Italian government that's been from behind the walls, how things work or do not work. Reasons. So just short slides. The points I want to make is that I think it resonates with some of the comments that come out. Is about a new approach to delivery of infrastructure. And this gets into the resilience concept, which is very hot topic at the moment, not only from a climate point of view, climate adaptation point of view, but also from critical infrastructure was mentioned before, from a defense priority. And allows us to put together some of the different dots, different issues that we see, building on what we know, which is the barriers that we see, the delivery model of infrastructure which is not working. This is a starting point. We know that things as they stand do not allow us to reach the goals that we want from a policy standpoint. That there is optimization and efficiency that this new model should allow, which reflects into reduced cost of capital, involvement of private sector, ESG discussion, that. And what brings together all this is the governance, and that's Sachin has been repeating that a few times already. Linking all the aspects, the different stakeholders that we have, the potential opportunities in the way of doing new things in a different way technology allows
the government systems. The way we came to this, well, I'm going to skip this, but the framework is what also came out yesterday, the G20, the SDGs, the Sendai framework for disaster risk management, the UN climate change and green agenda, reflected in the European level in different directives. And again, I think I could have a similar slide to the one we have shown on digital, on green, and how many different directives are there, and they're coming out very confused and complex sort of system framework. And also the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is an Indian-based agency, very active on disaster resilient infrastructure. Then they have a big project for the G20 next year with the Indian presidency, where they're going to publish this report we're discussing before, which has chapter on financing, but it will also measure-based solution. So very much a starting point of adaptation and the need to act on the climate agenda. This is what how that thinking has been reflected into the Italian situation. How the resilient sort of concept comes to the opportunity to offer a new model where you have the gray infrastructure, the way you used to build, but you also consider the nature element, the green, and how the two can be complementary in certain cases. Not always, of course, but so in some cases we've got a few projects where, especially in Italy, which is multi-country, it's very difficult to build and new, and you have the new sort of effects, whatever you do. Some projects which allow for a sustainability sort of framework claim that they're looking for the theme, sort of please in my backyard sort of attitude, where people recognize the value of what we're building, the economic activity and the sustainability sort of outcomes of your work. And of course, technology has a big role to play, this. So this gets back to the point we were discussing about how do you overcome the fragmentation that we see in politics and in society. And one way to look at it could be going back to the values. Why we're doing this? What is the objective? If the objective is sustainability and well-being, well, that's a nice framework to actually put ourselves whatever right or left thinking that is driving us in the same place, how things that we need to do. So we want to go to a more balanced economy, thinking about inclusion. We want to think about small state, national autonomy, the local. Well, you go back to the same values which are behind the sustainability framework. And that framework has to be applied, of course, in concrete terms to the infrastructure, sort of life cycle, to the stakeholders and actors. But it's a way, I think, how do we go about so recognizing that the issues that the model is not working for anyone. You need to do something different, and that could be a framework which is actually applicable. If people are on board, then of course things get easier, and so certainly it's less feasible. So, but what we mean by green infrastructure in itself? Green infrastructure could be the green element, which is specific to the infrastructure you're attached to. So here you have several examples: green bridges, green corridors, green roofs, depending on how this applies across sectors, across type of projects. But it's more than that. It's about ecosystem services.
So it's how those nature elements provide services to the community. So again, to the people-centric sort of approach that India is advocating and also behind the SDGs, you need to think about the system, the overall system, how your piece of policy that you're providing fits here broader objective. And of course, this is I was last week discussing with people from climate scientists behind the IPCC modeling the climate. What's the problem is how they take into account the economy and the climate solution, the mitigation sort of efforts that we have for the pathways to 2030, net zero, and so forth. And of course, this sort of picture came out, and they say on one side we have the model, we need to be precise about the assumptions we put in, and on the other hand there is thinking, ideological thinking of what actually the way you see the world, and that allows to make the nexus between climate and biodiversity, between climate and nature, which is not necessarily linked, and put in perspective in very different ways. Also the nexus with finance. So this is the high-level thinking. I think it's needed to get then to the purpose of building this coalition of people going, or countries going, the organization, industry going in this direction. And that's what the way then one specific aspect that we've been focusing was the governance aspect across the life cycle of an infrastructure project, from strategic planning, thinking about long-term planning, and seeing what countries have been doing, from Korea to UK to California, to project appraisal, risk assessment, and design, which includes capacity building, of course. And also financing in that sense, procurement and delivery, monitoring and evaluation. So this has to be all put together. And I give just a few concrete examples of what I've seen, we've seen over the last months. This is the Italian rail operator. And Italy is a good state for case for climate adaptation, resilience, infrastructure, given the geographic nature and the hills, mountains, the vulnerable state of the country and its infrastructure, which is old, 50, 70 years old. And the way the train operator has been investing on the left side to mitigate hydrogeological instability has been increasing considerably over the years. And that brought this operator to actually change the approach. Rather than intervene when the emergency comes up, plan ahead and start thinking the scenarios, the probability of risk they're going to have in different lines in the country. And then act accordingly. So starting from the macro IPCC sort of scenario, getting to the Italian situation, to their lines, and then to the need to maintain and programming, planning, the maintenance before actually is delayed. And that is an economic sort of argument. It's just not climate. It's about saving also on the investment, which is considerable. This is another example of the Thames Estuary plan in the UK, or titled called risk management. And that's the lighter green are the elements in the policy process which were integrated in the routine, normal way of delivering infrastructure governance in the UK. And of course, that complicates things. requires competence and capabilities, which is major issues. It requires data knowledge, which, to my last point, and getting back to the use of data, person work and analysis, there is a big potential there that needs to be integrated into the process. I was in a recent discussion on Copernicus data, on satellite data with the European Space Agency. And there's a lot of potential there in terms of technology, in terms of funding available, about Earth observation and sea level application of this new data or available data now. Before. The meeting was with the infrastructure operators and was interesting because there was geologists already using this type of data in a very clear way, and there was a discussion ongoing between the data provider on the side and the operator. And then it came out that there was actually another project which has been going on for some time on critical infrastructure from the defense point of view, with the main operators in Italy, which nobody knew about. And I was inside the ministry, so and I was dealing with the different sites, but the people in charge of the digitalization infrastructure didn't know about what people were doing with the satellite. Because it's so scattered and so fragmented, even inside one ministry, the responsibilities about this type of issues, that finally, lacking the systemic vision about where we're going and what to do, the silos are working properly, but not talking with each other. That's good example of what we were talking about.
Thank you, Raffaele. We are looking back into digitalization, right? Finally, so quite interesting. I found very, I would say, relevant that you mentioned the potential benefits of this green infrastructure approach or connecting with natural capital, right? As a point where a lot of approaches can converge, right? And yesterday, at several occasions, including Giovanni della Lucia, if I'm not mistaken, was the exact name, there was this idea floating around. The G20 context is especially important because it provides a place where dialogue continues. And I mean, things can be fragmented, but having places where dialogue continues means also things can be viewed again, right? There are different ways to shape the discussion. We already find the points which are the most contentious, and it's impossible to find an agreement, right? Because it's so different. Or you also look into issues where there can be an understanding across different governance systems, etc. And that clearly is one. And I think what is interesting also is that Indonesia, and it's not a critic, but Indonesia, especially the G20, and especially the infrastructure task force, was not so strong this year, right? In continuing on what was put on the table the years before regarding biodiversity, climate, and infrastructure, and this nexus. There was some attention, right? But when you look at the concluding points from the G20 and the G20 communique, this comes at a big second after what the minister described yesterday, that is everything we need with getting access to finance and mobilizing finance. Of course, part of mobilizing finance is meant to phase out the coal, so it has also environmental perspectives, but it's not related exactly to the valuation of natural capital, for instance, and something that was consistently not addressed. For instance, it could have been the impact of infrastructure development in a number of natural ecosystems. We didn't talk about forests. We barely talked about mangroves. We barely talked about coastal protection. We then talked about the calculation of the value of natural capital, right? Everything that exists, especially in the round of negotiations in the COP27 and the COP biodiversity. So now the Minister of Finance, Nella, will go to COP27 in a few days and so on. But the biodiversity component was, especially the macroeconomic consolidation of the biodiversity component, all this was a big ranked second. So this is a personal feeling in this in our discussion. So I think it's important for us to remind that, but also looking at Sachin about the priorities and the organizations of the priorities of the G20, which you are currently discussing with your counterparts. I think we need to find a way to restore the importance of that topic in a cross-sector manner. Maybe Sachin, or if you have any remark.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I think the presentation is extremely interesting. The fact that you have covered all the broad 4 pillars, bringing in the key challenges that we have, the kind of barriers that are the need for optimization that is needed, and then the component related to good governance. And I think that's where early resolution would come in. The fact that you also are trying to converge the idea of the green infrastructure and the resilient and sustainable infrastructure, how that convergence happen. The issues that we discussed yesterday was the fragmentation of the finance component. So how various finance streams are trying to address them, and fragmentation within that also is a major issue. Then what we discussed with Thorsten's presentation in terms of data. And unfortunately, you also come back to the point in terms of how that data component is to be addressed. But you addressed it in a different perspective, and not exactly in terms of its flows, but also in terms of its management. Wherever it is, how do we manage it better for better outcomes? And from that point of view, I think the track that we are thinking in G20 in India is to have infrastructure finance as one issue, but the associated streams are these which are specific to what Thorsten said in terms of enhancing efficiency and productivity. And that's where I find this quite interesting. Only one question that's coming to my mind is in terms of your work that you mentioned in terms of connect with the Italian government here. Is there any idea, proposal in terms of how a sort of rejuvenation of infrastructure in several of the mainland European countries, including Italy? Is there any idea, any proposal to connect some of these initiatives with that?
So connect with what?
The rejuvenation of infrastructure in mainland Europe.
Yeah.
Your assignment here with the Italian government.
Yeah.
Is it thinking and going in that direction of rejuvenation of the infrastructure? Are you thinking on those?
Yeah. I think it's definitely part of this discussion, this framework, because it's about maintenance as well. It starts with the understanding of what are the first objectives, where you want to go, but also then where you are, what is the state of your infrastructure at the moment. Something that we lack information of. That's where monitoring sort of technology comes very handy. And then we need to act on the sort of the situation which we know is quite direct in terms of urgent, in terms of action. And that's about maintenance. It's about to another scale. Another scale means what the concession at the moment are for operators in Italy and many other European countries, but that's a common problem. are not allowing for the investment needed to actually rejuvenate the buildings, the projects, the research park we have. And that's a major issue because it's coming, I mean, bridges are coming down, you know, and that's reflected in a model which is not working even from an economic. And where we are is that this has been neglected for so many years that now that we realize we have a problem, we don't know the scale of the problem yet in terms of figures. There's that sort of realization which is not been happening, and that climate can be a way to wake up people to it, but it's a larger problem. And then you need to manage the problem, meaning how do you go about prioritizing which projects start rejuvenating, because you cannot have those systems together. You cannot block all the roads in your country, you cannot stop the economy. And then what are the countries of it? If you Austria is closing the bridge just after the Brenner tunnel because of the same reason, without telling Italy, that means that a lot of exports from Italy is not gonna go to the Brenner, which is one of the ways to get to Europe, to the ports, and that. So as major consequences that you can level at regional level, something that should be discussed now.
I have a question about it's. I think it was mentioned yesterday by the Minister Giovannini about how you involve local communities and local cities, and I think this topic is very much on point with that. What are the best strategies to involve this kind of stakeholder in the discussion about the life cycle of infrastructure?
Yes, I don't know if you noticed, but from today on, there's no sustainability anymore in the name of the ministry. So something which was actually yesterday was my app. Today we know that sustainable is not, which is telling because it's also a way that not all people are on board at first. We know it's complex, not complexity to deliver infrastructure. So I think in the way we present what I just did, you need to have to be very aware of the trade-off between over complex sort of governance and the necessity to deliver at the same time efficiency in delivery. But no doubt, I strongly believe in the way to the engaging of the stakeholders through public debate that was introduced by the ministry. For big projects where you do have a formal process where you do engage in several times the local community. Now there is the new stadium from Milan, and that means there is a series of steps coordinated and managed by professional sort of companies where they bring along all the stakeholders and make sure that there are town hall discussion with people that are living in the neighborhood, concerned with the project, can express it, can see what's going on in a transparent way. That's really in communicating and allowing for this type of change. I think it's an important part.
It's fascinating. I think that we applied just for another project for the German Ministry of Economy. It's called heat. So what we do is we did the satellite data and the in situ data, or weather related, to empower the local city community to do urban resilient city planning. And we use Copernicus data. The problem is with the Copernicus data, it's great, no one uses it hardly. And because first they don't know cities that those data access is there. Second is they don't have the skilled people to use for that. So it's quite rich. So, and I think this comes back to the data governance, or how can you make it easy to use for those great projects?
This was the same conclusion from this meeting with the European Space Agency. This is so great, but then when you look at community, who is actually going to be able to even think about how this is practically of use. And they said that, yeah, part of it is a lot of funding going to use the satellite part of the recovery plan to Italy in particular. But even that funding is allowing for some academies, some foreign people education, that's not enough. I think is the model.
You know what you
The
might
model does not allow for the sort of integration of technology and education in a larger scale than just minor solution attached to using satellite data.
Yeah, you might imagine, you know, the 100 city program, right?
Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure which one, Italian cities. So there are a couple of German, we try to collaborate with those because they are really into doing those things. It might be a way to get to the ground. And what we also do, we use it, we offered to find a Zeppelin over a city with a very detailed analysis, and then to combine, because the satellite are always out of date, right? Because unless you have 3 satellites pointing always in the same area. And interestingly, when you do with a drone, no way you can do it because people are scared. But with Zeppelin, it's okay.
Okay, I think with this, we have reached the end of the time for the discussion. Thank you very much, Rafael. For you, I think Nela will be online shortly. Maybe, so I understand that from the screen here, Nela will not see us here. Anyway, yeah. So just for Francesco Profumo for this morning, my initial fear was that we would have much too much time. 2 hours would be too long, and we would exhaust our common interest. But in fact, no, we have continued for many more hours. We had opening insight by one of the thematic coordinators of the G20 from Indonesia about the evolution of the PPP organization to finance infrastructure, and it was very clear the way it has evolved and how much they also built on the G20 presidency to improve connectivity and understanding. This was the first point. So PPPs. The second point for today was by Torsten about digital governance and regulations, and I think it was also a fascinating point and very useful material. Both would echo a number of elements that were put on the table yesterday, and ways also to substantiate the program for the observatory, which you mentioned. And the last point, which was in the discussion right now with Rafael, was another approach about the valuation of natural capital and ways to both get into specific projects, but also learn from this project and strengthen at particular point in the future discussions of the G20/T20. And Sachin commented on that on several points regarding the ongoing establishment of the agenda of the G20 in the overall context of the preparation of the G20 media. So that were the main points for this morning, I think. And of course, we have the material that will be also connected. At this moment, Nela from from Ministry of Finance should be joining. I will just nudge her. So she should be here. She was here a minute ago. What I suggest for the closing of this segment.
Here we are.
She's connecting. Yeah. Is that we give the floor to Nela. Then Sachin will be back. Yes, Nela. Hello.
Hello.
So we are at the concluding phase of the discussion. Together with you and with Francesco Profumo. So please, the floor is yours for any comments you would like to make after the report from yesterday's session that I shared with you, or for this morning's inputs, which you saw in the program. The floor is yours, Nela.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Nicholas. His Excellency Francisco Profumo, President Fondazione Compagnia di San Paulo, Co-Chair G20 Infrastructure Task Force, Mr. Raffaele De La Cruz, Senior Economist OECD, and Mr. Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General at Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, Mrs. Irawati Hermawan, Government and Public Sector Leader Deloitte Indonesia, and Mr. Torsten Jelinek, Director Taihe Institute, and Nicholas, my good friends, and President Grand Paris Alliance for Sustainable Investment and Co-Chair G20 Indonesia Infrastructure Task Force. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to all of us. And this is truly my honor to be able to participate in this important event to deliver a closing remark of this two-day seminar. I really feel the atmosphere of a strong commitment and support, having all of you outstanding speakers synergized with extraordinary participants discussing a topic that, if I may use a wording from Minister Sri Mulyani yesterday, a topic that is not only important for our today's livelihood, but for our future generation and better earth. I strongly believe that what this seminar has contributed in the last 2 days provided concrete evidence and commitment for strengthening collective action toward pursuing infrastructure investment strategies and achieving net zero targets. So I will not summarize here all the exchange that we have in these 2 days, but maybe I will highlight some key points. So we
Recording
heard that
in progress.
Professor Francisco Profumo has introduced the proposal of a global infrastructure observatory focusing on innovative way to address gaps and promote a substantive dialogue between G20 and G7, building on sustainable finance. And Enrico Giovannini, the former Minister of Infrastructure of Italy, has inspired us on the lines between infrastructure investments and well-being, and showcase how the adoption of EU program has allowed Italy to ignite a strategy of long-term planning, but also to address a large-scale urban regeneration issues. In the first roundtable, we also talk about sustainable finance for infrastructure in light of G20 Indonesia. And we also, from the presentation of the speaker, we know that during the period of 2016 to 2030, global financing needs for sustainable investment fund in emerging countries around 23 trillion USD. The need for fund divided into 4 sector categories, such as transportation sector, around 3.7 trillion US, and renewable energy 1.76 trillion US, and waste management 0.1 trillion US, and green building sector around 16.33 trillion US. As we are aware, for sustainable development can be achieved by sustainable development goals. On the other hand, for climate change purpose, every country should invest their budgetary to mitigation and adaptation fund. So we also heard that Alessandro Crana from EU Commission has explained how regional cooperation, in that case that EU, which is more than just cooperation, has allowed to leverage over 800 billion euros in green and recovery program, which in return has facilitated the adoption of ambitious infrastructure development and regeneration. And we also heard that Robert Schulhammer from ADB will insist on the multiplier effect of MDB's investment. And then Giovanni Del Aricia, the Deputy Director of Research at IMF, has also explained that eliminating inefficiencies could help overcome the current crisis by improving the efficiency of public and private investment. He also said that dialogue and cooperation within the government was absolutely critical to counter trends of fragmentation. Carmine Denua from OECD concluded by highlighting the importance of G7, G20 cooperation and pointed out to some priority for the G20 India, including addressing the issue of urban investment. And there is a keynote from the president of Case de Depositi. He reiterated that his strong support to join G20, B20, D20 joint seminar as undertaken since last year and developed together during the G20 Indonesia, and the commitment of his organization to accompany innovative approach to infrastructure investment. And in Indonesia, Indonesia speaker also have some progress that Indonesia has already ratification a Paris Agreement through the law number 16 year 2016 as a consequence should to achieve a zero emission of 2050, no more than 2 Celsius degree, to increase resilience and adaptability to the negative impact of climate change, to support global financing in line with Paris Agreement. Indonesia's commitment to reduce carbon emission in nationally determined contribution is 29% without international support, and with international support is to reduce emission by around 41%. So in the second session, we also talk about infrastructure and just energy transition mechanism, activating private investment and building on digital opportunities. And then we have Pak Danang Parikesit. He made a good summary of the work of the G20 Indonesia and pointed out the proposal of creating a G20 fund for sustainable urban infrastructure and extend SIF into SIAF. So Arisa Pusponegoro from INA exposed how the fund is operating, especially to support energy transition mechanism and to contribute to the risking of investment, and Severin Nurford from Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Funds insist on ESG. So we also have Carla Patrizzi Ferrari from Compagnia di San Paolo explain how infrastructure investment could be very useful driver to counter inflation risk at large scale. We have Sakin Chaturvedi conclude by highlighting 3 priorities ahead of G20 India, such as urban infrastructure finance, energy transition, working across definition and standard. And then I also thanks to the audience that for the acknowledgement for our Minister Sri Mulyani and then Febrio Kacaribu keynotes yesterday. And then I also would like to share my insight about the 3 subtopics discussed in the seminar. About the green infrastructure and natural capital, the pathway to financing digital and low carbon transition, and then from urban crisis to urban recovery. So on the concept, I try to be short here, and on the concept of green infrastructure and natural capital, we note that these 2 topics are closely interconnected, whereas natural capital underlines the benefit human obtain from natural environment. Green infrastructure play a key role to preserve the sustainability of natural capital. On the issue related to pathway to financing digital and low carbon transition, the seminar also has shown that digital technology are radically changing, could play an important role to support sustainable finance. Digital transformation strategies need to be properly executed to manage the transition from product-centric to service-centric business model based on digital technology. Finally, from urban crisis to urban recovery, on the issue related to urban development, currently many countries were concerned by the lack of progress toward the SDGs and Paris Agreement, and also call for the urgent transformative action. One of the most pressing issues facing the world, such as rapid urbanization and its impact on people, cities, economies, climate change, and policy. Therefore, there is an urgent need to focus on the increasing of inevitable urban crises. This is because the climate emergency, pandemic, the biodiversity crisis, other natural and man-made disasters all converge in cities. Being prepared for and overcoming this crisis become a precondition to transform toward a better urban future. Furthermore, by the meeting at this event, we hopefully can find a better understanding of how national and local government can better prepare and respond to urban crisis and use the recovery to accelerate the progress. So in the end, please allow me to thank and appreciate to the organizer and all of you for the success of this event, with the main that also become of become one of the priority agenda in the G20 presidency of Indonesia in 2022. With continuous commitment, I'm optimistic this forum has benefiting and sharpening the G20 sustainable infrastructure finance discussion, as well as providing valuable insight for each country toward achieving net zero emission target, increasing resilience and adaptability to the impact of climate change, supporting global sustainable finance in line with Paris Agreement, responding both to long-term and immediate challenges to sustainable development. I also would like to underline the value and interest of the seminar we have organized. We have many seminars jointly held since February during G20 Indonesia presidency, and I hope this collaboration will still continue during the G20 India. And the idea also from the Professor Francesco Profumo in the beginning about a global infrastructure observatory and its connection with the macroeconomic issue and project finance and global and subnational issues of physical and digital and social infrastructure could be elaborated further. I think thank you very much, and I think I stop here and back to you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Nela, thank you very much. I will pass it on to Francesco Profumo for a couple of final remarks, and then after that, as the handover to India, if actually wants to say a few words, he will be more than welcome. Francesco Profumo, the floor is yours. Nela, thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for these 2 days of work. It was really easy. You know, when we started in February 2021, we were in the beginning of this process, and we were launching some ideas, and sometimes ideas are only on the scaffold. It's difficult to step down the areas. And what happened in this, you know, is 18 months, something like this, that after the G20 in Italy, we have been in Indonesia, and this idea to connect the two great events is really the beginning of new history related to infrastructure in different countries. And then the next step for India, I have the feeling that really to try to capitalize the experience and also the errors that the mistakes that we do sometimes. But this is the way we to grow up. And this idea to one observatory that can keep a track to different experiences in different fields, and then that we can also to have for the future the next G20 in different countries, not to start from scratch, but to start from what is the previous experience. And I have the feeling that this is the right way to go. And as you said in the previous intervention, we have 4 points where we can start with the observatory. First of all, is the importance of enhancing public-private cooperation. This is really the basic point. The second is achieve the transition to a climate neutral and resource efficient economy. The third one is how data and the digitalization might transform infrastructure. The new infrastructure for sure, but also the infrastructure that are in place. The data, the satellite data could be really a great opportunity. And I understand that it now is quite difficult, but in the meantime, the process, even the way data is doing a great job on this side. For example, in I don't know if you know, but in Europe, there is one large project that they call the 100 city with zero zero impact. And these 100 cities are working together in the same way that we are working for the large infrastructure, in the sense that the idea is putting in common the experiences and to have the possibility to do something always better. And then the last point is innovation, attention to impact, the design and quality. Then so for our observatory, we need to start in these 4 months. And from the technical point of view, we can discuss with Nicholas later on today how to organize the governance of this observatory. And we can just do something starting from the material that we got with the G20 in Italy and G20 in Indonesia, in order to have a possibility to transfer all this data to our friends in India. And in the meantime, with the observatory, we can go on with what is happening in this time. And this is the way that I believe that we can work for the next one. This is a very operative model, in the sense that, for example, Compagnia di São Paulo can support the security of the observatory in Torino, and we have events to the Valeria and Fulvio really are the strong engine of what we did in the last 18 months. And they really had this opportunity really to grow up in this very nice international environment. And their contribution is really great to go on in this side. In the meantime, we have our main engine, is Nicholas. Nicholas is really the man that pushed us in the direction that we are. And in the beginning, we were not worried, but it was like a fog day, when you don't know where you are. And then day by day, we really reach something better. In the beginning was very, very difficult. And thank you, Nicholas. Thank you for what you do for now. And for sure, with the observatory, you will be more and more into it. I don't know if you like it. You like it kind of food? You have to start from the provided the chocolates there. Yeah, this year Torino was really, it's amazing. During the year, we had maybe 100 events with a great success, starting from the Festival of Economy, with a festival for new technology, chocolate, and then we have Chocolatomico, and then next week we have the 8th final. Yes. It's really continuous. We have a 50 weekend, but are not enough for all. This means that we needed to have more than one event. Then it's really great. I hope you could enjoy your stay in Torino. I think that the discussion was very good, and also the model, because in the first day was a public way, second day was a more private, and this way it was possible to really have this also the possibility to reach this goal, in the sense that we can learn to be observed. Then thank you to the Minister of Finance of Indonesia, and for what they did this year, and for the friendship that we established. We hope that in the future we can meet each other. And during this difficult time, we have this possibility to really work in almost the same way, but we need also, if it's possible in the future, to have this personal contact. Then if you have any possibility to visit our country, or if you have a possibility to visit your country, we try to really need. And at the meantime, thank you for our friends from India. And for next year, we are available for what you need. And for sure, you can do a good job also on this side. And thank you to all the others. Raffaele, that is almost totally amazing. And you understood that also that Mr. Giovanni is a good friend. Yeah. Yes, he was my friend since a long time when he was a president of the ISTA. That is a very good man, long vision man. And now he's back at university. This is what we do. We do for a while, different service, and then we go to the university. That is really our house. Then, thank you for what you did. Now we have a light lunch. Yeah. And then maybe we can go to chocolate. Because I understand. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, indeed. I cannot underline the inputs of Valeria, and it's not just inputs, right? It was indeed a daily challenge, and as we said, an almost impossible project to organize now. It's almost impossible, but we succeeded. So, and thank you very much, because I think this was quite a very substantial and insightful series of exchanges that we had with the right blend of persons and different directions. I think we can have some time after this to further discuss this observatory. For me, I will close here. Sachin, if you have anything to say, right?
We discuss during lunch.
Okay, let's do that. Nela, thank you again for joining in. Thank you for the support. Thank you for ensuring that Mrs. Muliani and February could successfully join in. We managed to have yourself, your colleagues.
Yeah.
We had 6 panelists and 6 contributions from Indonesia. All went on perfectly. There is no technical failure and there is no failure at all. So that's also a good sign, right, of how we should continue to proceed with establishing our Torino meetings, and maybe the whole Torino meeting. There will be the ATP meeting. Yes, there will be the observatory meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to you too, Nicholas, and everyone there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice day.
Nicola, can we have a group photo?
Yes. Yes.
Recording stopped.
Thank you.